What is anxiety? How does it impact each Enneagram type? And what are some ways that each type can respond to anxiety and navigate it with more clarity and hope? Welcome to Your Enneagram Coach, the podcast, where we have helped millions of people around the world to discover, explore, and become the person that you have always longed to be. My name is Adam Breckenridge. I'm the Director of Coaching, and I am joined by my friend and fearless leader, the co-founder and CEO of Your Enneagram Coach, Jeff McCord. Jeff, welcome.
Hey, it's interesting you use the word fearless. I'm sensitive to the topic talking about anxiety.
Yeah, I use it on purpose. You don't have any anxiety, right?
No, I dealt with that a long time ago.
I've not dealt with that. I put that in its place.
That's right. No role in my life.
Yeah.
I wonder, there's a fun phrase that I'm often use that I've learned in the recovery world. But I first heard it from a long timer he was from AA. But he said, "Hey Jeff, if it's not messy, you're not doing it right."
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about doing any kind of personal development work, that if you're not scared, you're probably not doing it right. And so I'm not sure the goal is to be fearless. There's a certain sense to where if we're engaging in new terrain in our hearts, there ought to be fear because there's opposition there.
Absolutely.
There's unknowns in that land, and so to actually venture towards it can be really, really scary.
Yep. And not to get too far off topic, because fear and anxiety are kissing cousins, right? But but our fear gives us a gift. I think it might have been Chip Dodd who said, "If I'm gonna go to war, I want to go to war with people who are afraid."
You don't want idiots who are just like no fear whatsoever and make dumb decisions.
That's right. The fear is going to cause you to be careful. It's going to cause you to prepare. It's going to cause you to look out for yourself and those around you and protect those around you. So, I think if you're not doing it scared, you're not doing it right. And, what we're talking about in these episodes is, a relative to fear, which is anxiety. And we're talking about how each Enneagram type experiences anxiety. And just to briefly define it, as we did in the last episode, anxiety can be a little elusive and difficult to pin down and define what exactly it is. But our best stab at this would be anxiety is a common human emotional experience that can manifest, mentally. It can manifest in physiological responses, but it's a common human experience. Sometimes there is situational anxiety, which everyone faces. This is work, bills, parenting, conflict, life, relationships. And then there's also chronic anxiety. Think of this as more like anxiety disorders that can really kind of hinder our ability to cope or function with everyday life. But I want to come back to the basic understanding of this is a common human emotional experience that everyone, including every Enneagram type, experiences. And so what we're going to do in this episode is talk about how each type experiences anxiety. How does it show up? What are the trailheads, of anxiety for each type? And I think, Jeff, we're going to do this in triads. So you want to kick us off with the gut triad and talk about 8s, 9s, and 1s, and maybe what are some of the common anxiety activators and what are the trailheads, or how does anxiety show up for those types?
Well, one of the phrases that we use the term core motivations a lot here at Your Enneagram Coach, and the number one is the core fear. But as we talked a little bit in the last episode, you could just change out fear with anxiety. There's a core angst in the soul of each of all the different 9 types that really is the key activator. That's what sort of triggers, it turns on the anxiety and all the other relational style characteristics of each Enneagram type. So let's just take a look at type 1 for a second. So the core fear is being wrong, bad, or corruptible. And so they're going to be activated when there's imperfections, there's criticism, there's unmet high standards. If people aren't taking responsibility, people aren't following the rules, whether that be for themselves or whether that be for others, right? Because each of the subtypes kind of that inner critic is fighting with different things. And so what this can look like at times is that for the one is that they're feeling stressed that something's out of order or incorrect. So there's an unwarranted focus, an
Mm.
obsessiveness about being right.
Mhm. Mhm.
When you hear about it's the resentment that the ones are continuously carrying when people aren't living up to expectations or doing the things that they want to do. Now, that's going to be hard for the one to recognize, or maybe they'll recognize the resentment, but they won't recognize the real anger that's behind all of that. And they certainly wouldn't want to say that they're actually feeling anxious.
Mhm.
Whenever, the one as a child, their anxiety shows up by taking responsibility in areas where they felt like their parents weren't.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
responsibility can be a trailhead for a type 1, specifically whenever they're experiencing anxiety. But what comes to mind for you when you think of type 1s and how anxiety shows up for them?
Yeah, I think initially because we're in an election season, for type ones can fall into a bit black and white thinking, right or wrong, good or
Mm-hmm.
bad, and so an opposing viewpoint can be a real activator. Can be something that really causes anxiety to get triggered. There can, and for a type one, you're operating in anxiety if you have a small window of tolerance for a different viewpoint. And if you're falling into the black and white thinking, and then again, just kind of like you mentioned, the classic example is just mistakes, not being able to embrace the gift of their own imperfections, seeing the imperfections in themselves, and the inner critic really exaggerating the anxiety of you need to fix this, you need to reform this, you need to get better, you know better than this. Those moralistic inner critics really amp up and exaggerate the anxiety.
Adam, that makes me realize that, perhaps with the type 1s, and be sure to put in the comments and let's support one another in this
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
great phrase that a mentor from a distance that both Adam and I have, Steve Cuss, who's written a lot about anxiety. He's got the expectation gap, I think, now, and also managing leadership anxiety, which is
Mhm.
leadership is a broad term for him. That's for anybody in relationship, really. It's not just about leaders in organizations. But he says you have to name it to tame it. And what we're trying to do is to help you to name things. And so if you're a type 1 or any type as we're going through this, why don't you try to name where your anxiety is coming from and how it shows up? Because it's not just showing up front and center. You may call it something else, and so you may be learning something, but let's just help one another out to learn how to name what's
Yeah.
happening in our souls together, particularly for those who share the same type as we do. But it makes me think of when for the type 6, it's the racing thoughts. It's the flywheel of thoughts that go through our mind that is an easy indicator of anxiety. But what you just described for the type 1, it's the inner critic.
Yeah.
If your inner critic is out of control, that's anxiety.
Yep. Anxiety.
That is your way of
Yeah.
trying to handle fear in your life
Yeah.
to make things
Yep.
right. And it's going
Yep.
to get it's hyper focused, it's hypercritical.
Mhm.
It's disproportionate to what is necessary.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Well, why don't we move on? So, the goal here in this particular episode is that we're going to be naming it. Now, in
Yep.
the next episode, we're going to be talking about what to do whenever you start to find your own heart at unrest, at disorganized. The It's spun out as a term that Beth and I use whenever we feel a little disorganized or feel like we're not on our best game. But let's talk about the type 8s. Now, type 1s and type 8s seem to often always have their composure and are maybe a little less influenced by other people. And we think, oh man, they're never anxious. They always know what to do. And they always think that they're doing something right. They always think they're doing it the right way, right? But for the 8, their core anxiety, we'll say, is being controlled or harmed,
Mhm. Mhm.
being powerless, being
Mhm.
vulnerable. And the disproportionate response to that is always be in power and don't be
Mhm.
vulnerable.
Right.
Be impenetrable by other people and relationships. Now, whether that be cultural, where they try fiercely to live the independent life, but to the degree that you are trying to be independent and impenetrable, unharmable, there's anxiety that's fueling all that. And you know it's anxiety too, because you know what happens for a lot of twos and a lot of eights is that eventually their bodies catch up with them and they start to experience sickness because they can't manage life. You're not intended. You're a human being with limitations. You're a human being with boundaries, and you can't carry it all. And so there'll be all kinds of other little sideways behaviors and thoughts and behaviors that'll try to help you to cope with the pressure that you have put on yourself to not be harmed. And I was about to say Andrew. I don't know why I was going to say Andrew. I don't even know an Andrew. I was
You know
thinking
what?
maybe there's an Andrew who's an 8. I don't know. Adam, what comes to mind for you when you think of the type 8s?
Well, first of all, anytime someone calls me by the wrong name, I use what is a classic old man joke. And if you're a listener and you don't know this joke, you're welcome. And it's you can call me whatever you want, just don't call me late for dinner. I don't know. I mean, are you familiar with this joke?
Adam, there are times where you give us an insight into Arkansans. I've heard you pronounce it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that was one of them because
You're not
no, I've
familiar?
not ever heard that before.
You didn't have that one in Texas growing up, in
Don't
Mesquite,
call me
Texas?
late for dinner.
Yeah, you can call me whatever you want, just don't call me late for dinner.
What
How
was the
about this?
one from Liam Neeson in Airplane? Don't call me Shirley.
Wait, not Liam Neeson. Liam Neeson is the like Taken guy who's like all I can think about now is Liam Neeson in Airplane, and that would be an amazing
Dude,
combination.
well, I mean,
You're thinking of Leslie
not to say
Nielsen.
that I've ever watched the show, but I know that he makes an appearance in the movie Ted, where he's talking about our tricks for kids.
Yeah, exactly. You were thinking of Leslie Nielsen.
see,
His thing is
same
his thing is,
initials.
Don't
It was
call me
close.
Shirley. Don't call me Shirley.
Don't call
Sure,
me.
surely you can't be serious. And he says, I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
Okay.
All right. Oh, hey, we've annoyed every
Dude,
Enneagram 8.
that's what just happened. That's how we deal with our anxiety. Adam was concerned about addressing the anxiety of an 8 for fear of offending them. Or Jeff was, and so then I just went on this long joke of going through actors with the letters L and N, and different phrases they've used in the various movies they've been part of. So there you go.
And
That's what
now
happened.
all the eights are offended because we were about to get deeper into the example of how anxiety shows up, and then we went on our tangent, and so they're still waiting. They're waiting on us to
We're exercising. Maybe they're getting anxious and angry with us.
Yeah, how does that make you feel as you guys are listening and waiting? What are you feeling right now? That rage that you're noticing is called anxiety. But I think here's a line, and every line I have, every cliche or line I have, I took from someone else. But a good way to think about anxiety if you're an 8, because as an 8, you may be listening to this and thinking, no, I don't feel anxious. I don't ever walk in a room and feel anxious. I'm self-assured. I feel confident on my own 2 feet. I can walk in any room and I'm the leader. I don't feel anxious, but it's helpful to say, no, this is your anxiety. Like we did with the type 1, like the inner critic out of control. That is your anxiety. For the 6, the worst case scenario thinking, that is your anxiety. For an 8, your bravado or your strength, your bigness, your rage. Don't think of rage like the Incredible Hulk. Rage is just big energy. And your bravado often is your anxiety. Here's the line. Anxiety is me trying to get bigger than the fear that's inside of me. It's an
Well,
attempt at
you
getting.
mentioned it in the last episode that oftentimes if you're getting big because of someone else's anxiety, it's because you're afraid of anxiety.
You're anxious. Yeah. And so the thing is, it's like a dog shows it's showing its teeth, right? Like you would look at the dog and you're going, man, he's tough and big and strong and loud and aggressive, and I don't want to mess with him. But if you could zoom inside the soul of the dog or the mind of the dog, kind of the way we get to see inside Riley's mind and inside out,
Mm-hmm.
you would know that the dog is afraid. The dog is anxious. That's
Mm-hmm.
why the dog is displaying bravado. He's using his strategy to protect himself, and this is often for an eight how it shows up. And if you feel like someone, here's some situational examples. If you're in a situation where you feel like someone is going to try to take advantage of you or manipulate you, someone's going to try to use their power and position to mistreat you or someone that's in your circle. Eights are very protective of those in their circle, and they're very protective of the vulnerable. And if you feel like someone else is going to pose a threat, there's an anxiety about that. And that's a good thing. That's what I'm saying is like Jeff and I are trying to say that not anxiety by default is not bad. It's trying to help.
Yeah.
Um, so these are just some examples of how it might show up. If you feel attacked, if you feel restricted or controlled, if you feel threatened in some way, you're going to notice the strength emerge, and most likely that is your anxiety.
Yep.
You know.
That's awesome, Adam. I really appreciate. I even think of yeah, we've been recently been attending a few different large group gatherings, uh, and as I talk about eights, they oftentimes as I talk with eights, they sometimes boast about how much they don't care, and
Yeah.
that was the equal but opposite era, but that is defined by anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be so fiercely independent, you can't impact me, and my independency will be determined by how anxious I am. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even being in a room that feels a little leaderless, like the eight waiting to find out if someone's going to lead or not,
That's anxiety.
there's angst
Yeah.
in the room that you
Yep.
may or may not need to fill.
Yeah.
Now, the great
Yeah.
thing is that there are eights who will step in the gap when needed.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it certainly takes wisdom to understand how to have a right relationship with an anxiety and understand its message in the moment.
Yep.
But sometimes it could be for the eight to pave the path to call someone else out to lead,
Uh huh.
to help a leader. Well, let's move on to type nine. So type nines, their core angst, their core anxiety, core fear is the loss of relationship, the loss of connection. And so when the reason why they have so much trouble with arguments, with conflict, is because of the anxiety that it creates in them that this is the beginning of the end, that this is how they're going to lose connection.
Yeah.
So how much stress they feel whenever there's even disagreements between other family members that may not even be related to them. So they've lost a sense of boundary, carrying a sense of just nines read the room. They can feel the angst, the anxiety in the room. And sometimes that can be helpful, but sometimes that's a real burden for them because I was telling someone it's almost like the superpowers that come with the characters in the movie X-Men, that they need to learn how to yield this gift that they have. Wanting to move to solutions, losing your sense of identity in order to get to a solution to make people happy, that's anxiety that's motivating you. What comes to mind for you, Adam?
Yeah. I think about my, you know, I'm really close to type nines. My wife is a type nine, and so when I think about context and contextual examples for her, it's like if she and I are having a confrontation, she's probably most likely a 1-to-1 nine with me, and so if we're having a confrontation or a disagreement, I can see the anxiety, and she doesn't pursue. It's more like shut down. That's how anxiety shows up for her. And so if you're a nine and you fall into sort of a relational narcolepsy, of just, I'm going to disappear, which is also the thing they're most afraid of is, being overlooked you know, but it's like, I'm going to disappear. I'm going to withdraw. That is her anxiety. That's it.
Yeah.
That's how it's showing up. And Now, I also see her anxiety show up in an anger. She's in that gut triad, right? So there's a common desire for justice, and our eights and ones friends are very attuned to this as well. But if she perceives that there's a justice, being overlooked, people not receiving justice, someone's being, the marginalized or the defenseless, or being, harmed in some way, like there's an angst and an anger that shows up, and it is an anxiety of, I've got to do something about this.
Yeah.
Somebody has to do something about this. And again, that's that part of hers has good intentions, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's what comes to me for the nine. Chaos. Any kind, where there seems to be chaos and a lack of unity, whether that's just in our home or in certain relationships, like all of those are contexts where the anxiety is gonna. But mostly with me, mostly if she if she and I are having a disagreement that doesn't get resolved, that's where that's going to be the main trigger for anxiety, and it'll show up in her sort of disappearing. You
It is
know.
interesting to, even as we put these themes together and now we're kind of blending into subtypes, is that how each type experiences anxiety can be directly tied to their subtype as well. So if you've gone
Absolutely.
that far, or maybe want to be interested in something like that, that maybe it's not just with your anxiety, it's not just with one person, but with a group of people, or just kind of communal type anxiety, to take a look at some of the subtypes, because that could really answer some of the questions that people may have, and where does their anxiety begin for them. Well, let's
Yeah.
take a look at the heart triad, and I'll let you lead off on each of the two, threes, and fours.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about our type two friends. The core angst, as you said, Jeff, or the core anxiety, core fear for a type two is that fear of being unloved or unwanted. There's an anxiety that comes from not feeling appreciated, not feeling wanted, not feeling needed. That's the core desire of a two, is to be loved and wanted, for who they are. And so if that need, I mean, that's a basic need for every human being, but twos have a particular desire for that, and a particular vulnerability for needing that. And if that need is not being met, there is an anxiety that's going to show up. And it's almost like a separation anxiety, of, I don't I I'm not sure I belong and matter with the people I want to belong and matter with. And so there's a gap between me and this person, and all the tension, and the and here's one way it often shows up. Anxiety can show up in the form of shame, of like, maybe I'm not wanted, maybe I'm
Mm-hmm.
not, maybe I'm unwanted, you know, maybe I'm
Or even
unworthy.
when I think of twos, I think of how much they insert their presence into other people's lives. So a two, in order to address their own fears around being unwanted, will insert themselves into the lives of others so that others don't feel unwanted, hoping that it will ease their own anxiety about how they feel about
Hmm.
themselves.
And let me
And
say this: you talk about inserting yourself, like moving into someone else's life. Here's one way your anxiety shows up as a two is if you're exhausted, if you are, um, if you feel really underappreciated yet you're pouring out, if you're over functioning in people's lives, if you're people pleasing. These that it's like it's like the Jeff Foxworthy, like, there's your sign. Remember that
mm-hmm.
from the 90s?
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, but that wasn't
there's
that
your
wasn't Jeff
anxiety.
Foxworthy,
Oh, it
Adam.
wasn't?
No, it was the other guy. I don't
Oh,
remember his name. He was the shorter guy, not Larry the Cable Guy.
who? Ron?
No, that
Something?
was the
Oh,
drinking
no.
guy.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Hold on,
Well,
I'm going to
here,
Google it. Hold on just a second,
Google it.
because you
Who?
corrected my Liam Neeson reference earlier. So
Well, no. Thinking of Liam Neeson in the Naked Gun series is
Bill
one of the.
Engvall. Ha ha!
Oh, Ingval,
Gotcha.
Bill Ingval. You did get me.
Got
Here's your
it.
sign.
Yep,
He's the one that did Here's Your Sign.
he did. Yeah, he tells stories about stating the obvious.
Okay. Well, Bill Engvall. But it's like that. Here's your anxiety. It's like if you want to know how it's showing up, if you're exhausted, over functioning, there it is.
Yep.
You know, there it is.
There it is. It was funny. We were doing a marriage retreat. So Beth and I did our first extended marriage retreat, Enneagram, really for marriages. It was an incredible experience, and we were so impacted by the willingness of these couples to follow our lead and to trust us. And we were so thrilled to see the impact of what it meant for them to be able to have conversations with new language. But one guy came up to me. It was actually over dinner, and he said, "Hey Jeff, you're a funny guy, and then you'll make these really provocative questions and go really deep." Because do you use your humor to kind of diffuse a room? I was like, you can get out of my kitchen, like you're
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
but
yeah,
using other things to diffuse the anxiety is common for all the Enneagram types.
that's right. Yeah,
It's just the way that we
yeah,
cope with them.
that's
Let's
right.
talk about type 3.
Yeah, yeah. The core anxiety cause for a three, or is that core angst or core fear, is a fear of failure. It's a fear of being unworthy of success. It's a fear of others looking back at you. Are you looking at yourself? Are you looking at others looking back at you with eyes of disappointment and disapproval? You're not enough. You're a failure.
I feel anxiety when you just said that. When someone's looking back at you with the eyes of disappointment, like, yeesh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nobody
I
wants
feel
that.
that. Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. And for the three, again, there's a particular fear of that. And I have a lot of compassion for my three friends who carry that. And that anxiety occurs when they feel that when they're not being productive. They're not being productive. They're not being successful. They're not being recognized for their achievements. That's the core anxiety cause for them. And then there's lots of contextual examples of how this shows up. It can show up in a overperforming. If you're a three and you are exhausted from pouring out and performing and doing, that's a good sign of that. That's your anxiety. When you feel like you have to constantly be getting better. There's a fine line between self development and anxious self development, like what I would call compulsive self development. There's a compulsivity to I've
Mm-hmm.
got to get better. I've got to outcompete this person. I cannot lose. There's a difference between um, doing your best and having to be the best.
Yep.
I mean, if you're doing your best as a three, and this we tell this to our kids all the time. If they've got a test or a softball game or something, it's like, hey, do your best. That's all we can ask. And if you strike out, you strike out. I mean, it's okay that you have feelings about striking out. It's okay that that makes you angry. It's okay that's okay. But
Mm-hmm.
just if you're doing your best, then you're doing your best. But if you have to be the best, that's a pressure that the soul can't sustain.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's a recipe for anxiety. It is your anxiety.
Yeah.
What about you, Jeff? What comes to mind for the three?
Well, I'm starting to realize that as I think about each of the types, this idea of projection is coming to mind for me a lot in these themes because I just think so much like for a threes when working in teams and groups, like they get really frustrated with incompetent leaders
Hmm.
or teams that aren't functioning efficiently or family that's not going along with the plans that they've made for the family, whether like be vacation or just getting through the weekend sports, let's say, and the schedule that needs to take place. So whenever other people aren't coming through the way that they want them to come through, they're projecting this sense of anxiety of we this is the schedule, this is the efficient way, this is the productive way, and we need to be efficient and productive. Despite what we may be feeling or experiencing in our life, you have to keep producing, and that's where the anxiety is coming from the type 3. Now,
Hmm.
they're the ones that can be the most disengaged from their heart. And so a 3 may not name it as anxiety. They may name it as frustration. They may or may not even be willing to name that they're feeling something. And the family may all be looking at them like, we can tell you're upset about something, but you're not telling
Yeah.
us, but it's all over your
Yeah.
face and we can read it
Yeah.
from your body, your nonverbal communication. But the
Yeah.
idea, I think, of projection is a way of underseeing a trailhead of what am I holding other people to that
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
I'm anxious about in my own self.
Yeah. Can I put it in a word? Here's a word that my three friends often try to disguise their anxiety as this word, and it's the word ambition.
Hmm.
Um, Nothing wrong with ambition, drive. I mean, those are virtues, but oftentimes we try to sort of baptize our anxiety as this is just ambition. I'm just trying to do my best. I'm just and it's and what's that saying of every person that died on Mount Everest was once a highly ambitious person. Um, you know, ambition is a virtue. So, my favorite thing to say these days, especially when people like to take sound bites and take things out of context, but my favorite thing to say is, don't hear what I'm not saying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not saying ambition is bad. I'm saying it's like this, in the same way that the ape might say, no, this is just my strength.
Yeah.
This is called confidence. Well, yeah, but there's a gold and shadow side to that. The gold is your ambition can take you to great places and make everybody around you better. But the shadow side of your ambition is that it's actually a compulsivity that doesn't know how to stop, and that's anxiety. What you
Mm-hmm.
call ambition is actually anxiety. Does that make
Yep.
sense?
Yep. It does. It does.
Well, let's talk about fours. Let's talk about fours. Round out the heart triad here. So the core anxiety cause, the core angst or core fear for our four friends is really a fear of not having an identity or personal significance. It's an anxiety caused by feelings of inadequacy, especially being misunderstood. That really the shame of being misunderstood causes a strong angst for the four. If they're feeling as though they're not seen as special, honored as special, if if you're not valuing their uniqueness, there's an angst that they
Mm-hmm.
carry. Another way that anxiety shows up is by internalizing other people's pain. You know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
Fours have an incredible gift for empathy and for sitting in a place of pain. But there can be some transference that happens there. And so stories about people hurting or in despair or situations that appear hopeless can be too much for the four. And these are things that can activate that anxiety. But what goes on in you when you think about the four as they relate to anxiety?
Yeah, a few experiences that I've had with type fours. One would be I hear the ache in their heart whenever they share stories of their fantasy life. Fours
Hmm.
have a tendency to fantasize conversations and relationships, and they will predict or forecast how conversations are going to go or what people will say about them or feel
Hmm.
about them. And they experience it as if it's real and true. If you're fantasizing about conversations, that's anxiety showing up.
Hmm.
I think too,
Hmm.
it's kind of an interesting phenomena if you've been around fours a lot, and particularly if you're close to them, where they kind of let their guard down. But sometimes I experience the arrogance of the four, where in order to compensate for what they perceive as personal inadequacy, or maybe that they're too unique or flawed, that they actually come across as arrogant
Hmm.
and certain. Like
Hmm.
no one can understand the depth of this topic, this artist, this uh, procedure the way that I can.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's almost as a way of dealing, well, not having to deal with the angst that's inside their heart, that they're going to force you to understand their value.
Mm.
It's very nuanced, but it always surprises me. It'd be like with a 6, to be quite honest with you, because a lot of people experience me as strong and decisive. That is purely a coping mechanism because there's a lot of fear on the other side of it. It just shows up in a particular way in my life for various reasons, and so like what Jeff describes himself as being insecure and anxious, but yet he comes across as so strong and arrogant at times, so decisive, like he doesn't want your feedback and he's just making a decision. And sometimes that kind of strength is actually anxiety underneath it.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I've
Mm.
just experienced that sometimes with 4s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 And with the 4, you get sometimes I think where I see anxiety show up sometimes is just in a heightened sensitivity. If it just there's just um, uh, almost like an intolerance for anything really. And so when you get to that place of there's a constant defensiveness,
Yeah.
and that's anxiety.
Hmm.
Jeff, why don't you finish us out with the head triad, and we get
Yeah,
to
5,
dive
6, and 7s. That sounds fun.
deeper into our own type here.
It was fun. We were recently at the at MomCon, and wonderful experience, and so fun to talk with all of our listeners of the podcast and people who follow us on Instagram. So super, super fun. But, here we were in the context of thousands of women. And we would run into 5s, and they were always like, "I know, there's probably not many of us here," and there actually weren't that many 5s there, and they definitely were the quieter ones, and but they were there, and there were probably more of them than what we would have expected, or at least what they would have expected. But well, the core anxiety of the 5 is being overwhelmed or depleted. Anxiety arises from a lack of time, space, or energy in order to recharge.
Mm-hmm.
And, if for the 5, the way this shows up is if they find themselves increasingly trying to get away,
Yeah.
where maybe they're like these moms at MomCon where they've got young kids. There's really not an opportunity to get away. That they have to be present, but they're always thinking about trying to get away.
Yeah.
That's that sense
Yeah.
of anxiety.
Yeah.
I think too, whenever 5 start to uh, disproportionately focus on studying the nuances of a particular topic that are unnecessary to meet the needs of the moment in order to know all the details about how it works. That
Mm-hmm.
can be a form of anxiety. Now, it can also be sort of like a hobbyist and just simply done out of playful curiosity and intrigue, like the engineer who wants to understand how the toy works, and so they disassemble things in order to put it back together to see how it works. So it can function for the 5 in both ways. But the 5s will know that whenever, or at least they know the experience of when they get obsessively focused on a topic and give themselves to studying it more and more and more. The other thing is the avoidance of feeling incompetent or uninformed, that it actually creates anxiety for them. That is anxiety for them, is
Uh-huh.
trying to avoid situations where they would feel this way. Anything else you'd add?
Yeah. I think the only thing I would add is, because a lot of 5s will hear you say, increasingly trying to withdraw, and they will just point out that that's inherent to their type. I mean, they need more time and space to recharge. And 5s love solitude, and they're okay with more time to themselves. The only thing I would say is there's a fundamental difference between solitude and isolation. And
Yeah.
so, if you are isolating, and that is where you are putting up proverbial walls thick, tall walls to keep other people out, and you are retreating to your intellectual world, and that's the real estate where you're sort of camping out, and you're isolating. That is your anxiety. Solitude's different. Solitude is a basic human need. Again, everybody needs it. Even our type 7 friends, or the most extroverted person on the planet, needs time alone to themselves to recharge, to reconnect. Solitude's a need, but if you're isolating, no one's meant for that, and that is your anxiety, the isolation, the withdrawing.
One thing that did come to mind as I was listening to you about isolation, one way that fives do isolate themselves and distance themselves relationally is they deny their need or their experience of emotions.
Mm.
And a lot of fives would say like they don't have feelings, or they don't know how to explain what they're feeling. They don't have words to explain what they're feeling. That's actually anxiety showing up.
Mm-hmm.
Emotions are dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Emotions can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
If one of the core longings is for the five that their needs are okay, and that at some point as a young child they decided that their needs were a problem, and that they wanted to take care of themselves apart from parents, and then emotions would say like, no, I'm a person who has needs, who needs attunement from parents.
Mm-hmm.
So even isolation, like it is a movement of anxiety.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
please come after me.
Yeah.
Please come and find me and see me that I need you.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's look at type 6. Now we're in the hood. This always happens whenever we get to these to the type 6s, but we're just talking about the neighborhood we live in. But
That's right.
So the core angst of the 6 is being without support or guidance. It emerges from insecurity and uncertainty. And so situations that we're facing like now in our culture is just, I don't know the rules to play by in order to feel safe. There are no rules, it seems like.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing that I can sense that I can find a sense of control or power. And so I'm left to be powerless. And also there's a theme of learned helplessness for the 6. That's helplessness that's actually taught and caught by, it's really all the types, but it's feeling powerless in the world, feeling helpless in the world, and trying to find mechanisms to align with, to adopt in order to feel safe again. Adam, the craziest thing, when we're at this MomCon, I was thinking about our next event that we're going to, which is the Extraordinary Women Conference in Charlotte at the end of October. Mm-hmm. And well, as many of you know, when I think it was Hurricane, is it Helen? I can't remember the name, but it's the hurricane that recently rocked North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. Well, one of the highways to get to Charlotte has been knocked out. Like it literally, there was some erosion that happened and the highway collapsed. Seriously, I probably spent 2 hours thinking about this. I even went to Google Maps to look at it and to see which different ways we were going to have to go in order to drive to get there. But it was keeping me up trying to figure it out. And I was half asleep again, trying to figure out how in the world we're going to get to Charlotte and how long is it going to take us.
Yeah.
The answer was simply clear. Like there were things that I could do. Beth and I can break up the trip and have a fun little weekend together on our way there and on our way back. But fears about, did I make a mistake in not booking a flight? Are we going to have to go through these smaller towns? Are they going to have some road problems as well? How are we going to make this thing? And that's just the idea. Like no one's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to have to figure this out. But I was carrying it in a very anxious way. It wasn't about planning. It was about something way more than that. So feeling worried about future events, experiencing the experiences of the body. My anxiety shows up in my stomach. It can show up in my neck, but it's primarily through the thoughts in my head. Mm-hmm. Regret's another big one for me. I know that regret is usually anxiety showing up that don't make this kind of decision again. I
Mm,
was the one that was responsible for preparing all the items that we needed to take for our booth for this big event. And we were flying there, so I had to make sure that things were shipped to the right place. I had to make sure that we were packed the right things. I made a mistake and I regretted it, but I thought that we could take a bag weighing 70 pounds. It was actually 50. But then on the way back, I probably spent at least 2 or 3 hours thinking through how to make sure our bags were all within the 50-pound range so that we could get it back without having to
he's
pay
like,
more
I'm not going to
money.
make that mistake again.
That's right. So regret's a big one. How does your anxiety show up, Adam?
Yeah. Well, also being a six, and I think I'll say this through the lens of subtypes. I mean, you use all three subtypes, but I certainly identify more with the self-preservation six these days. And so it usually shows up in obsessive thoughts about not having enough, fill in the blank, just
Yeah.
not having enough, not being enough, not having what it takes. And
Dude,
some of
I
that is,
overcook food when we have
yeah,
guests. I don't know.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean
It's so
and
funny.
that's funny that you mentioned that because I love to smoke meat and barbecue, and I'm always super nervous about checking the internal temperature of food, before I serve it to my
Is that
family. Because I'm
right?
like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, because I don't want to be the ones to poison my family and friends and be responsible for their deaths. Um,
Dude,
and
that got serious really
that's
fast.
where see what I mean? And hey, there's your anxiety. When it gets to worst case scenario real fast, when you go from 0 to 60, in 3 seconds, 2 seconds or whatever, that's your anxiety. And, worst case scenario thinking, constantly seeking reassurance, the inability to trust yourself and your own judgment, man, those are all manifestations of anxiety for the six, and I'm familiar with all of those.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Well, let's just talk about type 7, which is another type that we might consider. Sevens don't have anxiety. They're all about having fun and always next to the new adventure. But they carry a core angst about them, a core fear of being trapped in pain and deprived of freedom, the loss of decisions. And so, whenever they start to experience limitations or they start to experience routine or, heaven forbid, boredom,
Mm-hmm.
there will be an angst about them. Now, that
Mm-hmm.
anxiety is not going to look the same as the type 6 or the type 4. It's going to be look unique to the type 7. But there's a sense of restlessness, of
Mm-hmm.
new experience, new adventure, the newness of the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's anxiety. And perceiving that they are limited or restricted. That they may not be. That may just be normal human boundaries and expectations and responsibility. But those can be experienced in an anxious heart as a way of feeling trapped or deprived of something. And so they'll be anxiously trying to free themselves from that.
Yep.
Um, there's stories of people in pain and despair that forces them to feel negative emotions. Can be
Mm-hmm.
very um, activating for the type 7 to feel anxiety. They may kind of stay away from certain things that would help make them feel or cause them to feel certain emotions of sadness and hurt. They may want to avoid those things because they don't want to experience the negative in their perception. And so there's this ongoing vigilance and angst of avoiding anything that's going to be negative or pessimistic.
Mm-hmm.
In your relationships with type 7s and coaching type 7s, how do you see their anxiety showing up?
Yeah. Inability to stop, to be still, um, uh, just constantly, almost compulsively asking the question, "What's next?" And when I have a friend who has one of his sons, he's pretty sure is a seven. We're all pretty sure he's a seven, and they can be in the middle of enjoying a family movie night with popcorn and snacks, and they finally get everything. They've been looking forward to it all week, and they get everything spread out. And his son will, before they even take the first bite, his son will say, what are we doing tomorrow? What are we going to do tomorrow morning,
Yeah, that's
Dad? What are
great.
we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing after the movie? And he'll say, in a very non-shaming way, he'll say, hey, right now we're focused on what's now, not what's next. And we'll talk about what's next soon, but right now we're focused on what's now, not what's next. And I think for sevens, the inability to focus on what's now, particularly being
Hmm.
like what's now inside of you,
Yeah.
where are you emotionally? So if you're doing constant activity, um, constant stimulation, overindulgence, you may call it fun, but if you are, there's a concept called pleasure stacking, where it's like
Hmm.
just one fun
Yeah.
thing after another,
Yeah.
just and nothing. I mean, everything's a
Well,
gift from
you know
God.
this to be true if you have ever planned a Disney trip
Yeah, yeah,
where you
yeah.
overplan it and you end up
Uh huh.
just being exhausted and
Uh huh.
upset that you did this to yourself.
Yeah. Well, what's funny? The Jewish rabbis talk about pleasure stacking as like a command on the Sabbath. They say like the Sabbath is a snow day.
Hmm.
Remember when you're a kid and you get a snow day and
Yeah.
it's like this is a day God says do what you want to do. Rest. I will keep the world spinning while you play.
Yeah.
It's an exercise in trusting God to let go of
Yeah.
everything and just play. And so the Jewish rabbis would talk about pleasure stacking, eat, drink, be merry, have fun,
Hmm.
like do the things that you want to do and do it with God, but like get out there. So pleasure stacking is a great way to enjoy your life. But if it is your life, there's your anxiety.
Yeah. Right.
If it is your life, it's anxiety and the inability to just be present and be still and not be distracted. And sevens feel it. If you put
Yeah.
them in a place where you take away their freedom or they feel boxed in and they have to sit there. And when I'm working with a seven as a client, I try to be really gentle and compassionate and just help them name that like the
Yeah.
fidgeting energy, how uncomfortable you are, and the wandering mind is because you're dying to get out of this moment. You want to get out of
Hmm.
here, and that's called anxiety, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, but that's yeah how it shows up, I think.
I'll end with this fun little story. The same mentor that introduced me to the Enneagram, we would go on walks together during seminary. And there was one day we were walking around campus and we saw this guy running. And we were just admiring that this guy was out there running on this, you know, side road to the highway. And we were admiring and wishing we were runners and what that would mean for our health and our weight and all those different things. But a couple minutes later, a cop goes down the same road with their lights on.
That's why he was running.
And my friend, he's a therapist as well, and he goes, Jeff, we see people running, we always think, where are they going? What are they striving for? But we rarely ask the question, what are they running from?
Oh.
And when I think about type sevens, like, yeah, it's true that we may admire them for their fun and want to participate and join in and think, I wish my life was something like that. But oftentimes that energy can be coming from anxiety where they're actually running from something that God's inviting them to understand their own core needs, that their hearts can rest versus being restless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Good word.
well,
Good.
friends, I hope you enjoyed today. I hope this, as we began this idea of naming it to tame it, that hopefully you're finding some insights in how each of the types, how anxiety shows up in unexpected ways. Now, once we talk through these, it may be very clear to you, like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that was anxiety. And so hopefully that's helpful. But if put it in the comments and be sure to email us. But let's make this a community thing where how does anxiety show up for your type in your own experience? And maybe that's going to
Mm-hmm.
be helpful to other types or people who care dearly or in relationship with a person of your type. So be sure to put in the comments how anxiety is showing up for you in your own personal life. In this next episode, we're going to pay the path for you in order to tame it. What does it look like that when you are experiencing anxiety, what are you supposed to do with it? if we are supposed to have a relationship with us, and this is something that God has given us, that, well, He gave it to us for a reason, and it actually draws us closer to Him. Now, we're
Mm,
not going to spiritually bypass and just quote verses at you, but we're going to provide some helpful things that take into account all of your sense of humanity and the needs that you have as a human being so that your heart can come to rest, to be seen, to be heard, to have a sense of support and encouragement so that your heart can come to rest and your anxiety doesn't have to play such a significant role and carry such a heavy burden. So thanks for hanging out with us. If you missed the previous episode where we're defining anxiety, be sure to take a listen to that. We got one more. We're going to talk through how each type, what practices would be helpful for you, and how to tame your anxiety. Be sure to ask us your questions in the comments, or you can email us at info@yourenneagramcoach.com. Hope you'll join us next time for our next episode. Adam, it's always great to be with you.
same. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, everybody.